Okay, so next we're going to talk about JSON and how we can do some really cool and awesome things very easily. So take it away.
Speaking of JSON binding, so there's in XPages we have at least there's a few ways that you can and people have done JSON in XPages. If you're in SSJS, you just have the JSON object that will do to and from like strings, and then in IBM Commons there's JSON code in there that will let you read or write JSON in a stream-based way or kind of a wholesale, and these are functional. They're fine. Everything has that. One of the problems with Java is that there is no core standard for this is how to do JSON. Like there's no java.json package. Like
Right.
you can't just assume there's going to be something. So this has given rise to JSON, Jackson, any number of other ones. They all have different capabilities. One of the main ways that these other ones, so JSON and Jackson in particular, differ from what XPages gives you is that they convert to and from Java objects as JSON wholesale. So XPages, the stuff that's in there, will let you write or read JSON as JSON objects, like maps and things like that. But you won't be able to say, here's my custom class, turn that into JSON for me, or read incoming JSON and turn that into a class. You'd have to manually go through and say, I've gotten my JSON as a map, so get this property, set it in this object. Get this property, set it in this object, and vice versa.
Oh, I have written some agents that do exactly that, and it is boring as hell.
And so that term, it goes by a couple terms of like serialization or mapping or binding. The Jakarta spec for that, there's two. There's JSON-P, JSON processing, which is the just low level reading and writing of JSON. And then there's JSON-B, which is binding. So that is where you take an object and turn it to and from JSON. And so I've included these here. So if I go to, let's see, JSON example. Here, this is where I'm saying, okay, I have just a basic, I want to do a basic map being returned. So this is a map of food to bar, and then there you go, food to bar. All I'm doing in code is saying return this map. So collections.singleton map is a standard Java thing that has no notion of JSON at all. And then I'm saying this produces application JSON. And so the stack says, I know how to take a map and turn it into JSON. That is extremely easy. I will do that for you.
Right.
You can also use this here is JSON-P, where what I'm doing is saying create an object builder and build my JSON object. So it has its own kind of way of doing that. But then the interesting one is JSON-B, where it's saying I want to return JSON to the browser, but all I'm giving you is this class. So this class happens to have a JSON annotation, but it's not required for this. And so what that does is it says here, it takes this arbitrary class, which is just some class. And again, I've gussied it up for testing purposes, but it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to have this JSON thing. But what it's doing is it says, I see that there is a method called getMessage. And so I go over here and I've called it JSON message, and then it returns this string. And so it's converted that class to JSON. And it doesn't have to know anything about JSON ahead of time. You can take just any class. And it will figure it out. There are some rules that you can apply to the conversion if you want to, like, so this is where I've hinted to do this, and you could say don't emit this method in JSON because it's expensive to call, or I don't want it to be included in the output. So this is where you might say, so if you had your own business logic like invoice or employee or something, you might on there say, well, don't include salary in the employee object we return to the REST service, but we want to call, here we have an F name internally, we want to call it first name, or you just return the whole object and say, here's the employee object. So this is how you would build your REST service. And then if you combine those concepts, you would say, rather than having like an agent where you write JSON or using the IBM Commons or print, don't use print to emit JSON, you would say, I have a list of employee objects, and you would return that from your method. And then the system would say, well, I know how to do a list in JSON, that's an array, and I know how to turn arbitrary objects into JSON. I have JSON-B for that. And it will do all of that work. And you don't have to worry about escaping. You don't have to worry about Unicode, anything. It will just say, here you go. And all you do is say, I want to produce JSON, and here's my source. You handle it. So
Wow.
combines all that stuff together. And for example, you could have a method that says query employees by first name or whatever, and the incoming parameter has to be not blank. So you'd say make sure it's not empty. It has to be whatever, first name would probably not have a lot of restrictions, but you could say like if it was supposed to be query by age, I don't know why you would have this, but you could query by age and it would come in as an int. And so that way the system would say, well, if you put in ABC as the parameter, it will fail. So you don't have to check that. You don't have to deal with parsing it. You don't have to deal with any of that stuff. So like it handles all these things for you. And then the end result of a lot of this stuff is that you are writing code that's much more towards here's the problem I'm solving. I do some annotations to tell the system this is what I want the system to do. And it takes care of a lot of the plumbing and the busy work that you would previously have done.
Man, my brain is just spinning wildly out of control because I'm just thinking of the REST services that I've built using the Commons library and having to do all that transposition and taking things like objects or arrays or nested data sets. And you're telling me that all I need to do is build the object and pass it into the builder and I get JSON automatically and it understands.
Right.
Oh man, I'm gonna play with this.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we'll handle all of that.